to share. We've been doing a lot of help all around the country because of this experience here. And so it's been really interesting how people reach out and are interested and, want to just talk about this stuff because it's happening so much more than it had been. So it seems like it anyway.
For sure. I would agree to that.
Yeah, Donna, I was giving Allison a little bit of the history of DART, and it was after, I think it was Hurricane Michael, was it, where we formed
I think you're right.
DART? I think it was that.
Hmm.
Yeah, so this has been a ever growing group, and yeah, faced a lot of challenges over the years. Two hurricanes last year in Florida, um, where we had to deploy some folks, and I'm sure the team's still battling with some of the smaller loose ends today, but
Yep.
Well, I'm originally from South Florida near the Keys, and I've lived in New Orleans, I've lived in Chicago. So, um, it's interesting how across the country disaster is a little bit different. It has, they're different, but they have a lot of commonalities. And, you know, the more framework we have in place and the more we learn, the better off we're going to be.
well, that's sort of the point of these training sessions as well. And again, really, we appreciate you joining us. And Allison, are you able to? I know you've got a presentation or a PowerPoint. If you'd like to share the screen, take over the screen. And Donna, I figure it's 101, so I could probably get started now. But just want to say hi to everyone. I appreciate you guys joining for this DART training session. I've asked Allison James to speak with us. She is the Disaster Preparedness and Recovery Manager for the town of Superior in Colorado. Superior is the home to the Superior Marketplace, one of our Whole Foods anchored centers where I actually used to manage for about 3 or 4 years. And it's also the origin of the Marshall Fire, which took place, December 30th, 2021, and remains one of the most destructive wildfires in Colorado history. I didn't have a chance to work directly with Allison during the recovery effort, but we did engage with the community, the town, and they're really a pleasure to work with and really did help with our recovery process. So I thought it'd be fitting to ask Allison to join. She's very experienced leading coordination efforts across local, state, and federal agencies. I think you said most recently you worked with the LA chapter of the Urban Land Institute to help in the recovery planning of the January fires out here in the Pacific Palisades. There's actually an interesting LA Times article that I will post to our team's chat so you guys can read it. I got a chance to read it yesterday. And so I really just want her to take some time, share her experiences with community engagement, collaboration with, companies like ours or just the community as a whole. And hopefully there's some best practices we can take from this. So Allison, floor is yours. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the opportunity, John. You've been great and just a pleasure to start working on this with. Somebody may want to mute, maybe Jess. I can hear a little feedback. Thanks. Um, so, like John said, I lead the Department of Disaster Preparedness and Recovery in the town of Superior, Colorado. My background includes a lot of different work supporting communities through disaster recovery, including public engagement, personal wellness, construction, and daily operations. So I kind of run the gambit, which is an interesting dynamic because disaster hits all of these different things. And like John said, most recently, the Marshall Fire. I've led recovery for the town of Superior. We lost almost 400 homes, about 3 or 4 businesses that had to really be fixed. It's in that Brixmore marketplace area. And I've worked in flooding events in 2013 with the city of Boulder and hurricane efforts in Okaloosa County in Florida, which is kind of Destin, Fort Walton Beach, Crestview, those kind of cities up in the north area of Florida. Those experiences have really taught me that recovery just isn't about rebuilding our infrastructure. It's about restoring people's lives and livelihoods and our community connections, which includes businesses, right? And I've seen how these businesses play a vital role in that process. The businesses are often the first ones to respond to local needs. I mean, it's providing supplies that people don't have, supporting their own employees, offering spaces for coordination and care. For example, we even use some of the vacant offices in our Brixmore property for places for people to gather and borrow computers because their computers burned up, right? And they had to fill out applications for FEMA and small business loans. And we also held art therapy and wellness support programming for the community in those vacant spaces. So those are just some of the ways that we used Brixmore properties, for example, to help us recover in our community. So your leadership and flexibility and the deep ties to the community make you guys essential partners in all of these different phases of disaster recovery. And so just meeting like this today strengthens our partnerships and frameworks. And now you know me as a network person, and that means we'll be faster to recover together, have greater resilience, and basically a stronger future, to be a little cheesy. So this next slide is the typical phases of disaster, and it's just super interesting because this is totally my experience on how disasters kind of unfold in these series of emotional and operational phases. Immediately after the events, the heroic phase kind of happens. And that's pushed by adrenaline and rescue efforts and community solidarity. And everybody is banding together, right? So we kind of have this honeymoon phase where our fire families often feel, or whatever disaster it is, but here, like if we're talking specifically about Marshall Fire, our fire families felt really supported and hopeful because there's all this outpouring of assistance. But as time passes and this support kind of decreases over time, the disillusionment phase sets in. And that's kind of characterized by fatigue and frustration and a realization that this is going to be a long term thing and there's going to be a lot of challenges during this time. And so when this starts to happen, trigger events are going on, like we're having an anniversary of the date of the disaster, or maybe people are starting to experience funding issues for rebuilding their homes. Um, or even new disasters can happen. If a fire happens, we know that flood often occurs after that because the ground is less permeable. So this can resurface their trauma and deepen this emotional strain. And I think for all of us, understanding these different phases helps to guide compassionate and long-term recovery efforts and kind of being able to meet people where they are emotionally. So I always like this slide because it's very true. You have all these ups and downs, right? Okay, so this is kind of our nuts and bolts framework slide, and it's a bunch of stuff, but I'll try to be pretty quick for it. Um, Thinking about how disaster preparedness for business involves identifying risks, creating plans to mitigate the risks, ensuring continuity of operations during and after disaster. These are all of these little elements that feed into that framework. The first one, you're identifying potential hazards, like, okay, you're going to have a hazards map for the state, and it's going to say, okay, these are your top 3 risks: hurricane, flood, fire, or hail being here is one of our top ones. Power outages, right? Cyber attacks, or human made, like civil unrest or terrorism. And then you can start honing in on the likelihood of the impacts of each one of those hazards on your business, operations, employees, customers, supply chain, all these different areas. And you kind of take those risk assessments and you feed them into emergency response planning. You develop and document a plan that outlines actions to be taken during these different disasters or events. They may be smaller, you may not want to call them, it may just be a blip, but a lot of the same items will go into each plan, but then some of them will be a little different depending on that specific, if it's flood, you've got a lot of wet stuff and drywall to take out, or, same with the hurricane, right? But for hail, what is it? Roof damage, right? Siding or your vehicles or your fleet. So then you would include in those emergency response plans, evacuation procedures, communication protocols, emergency contacts, and roles and responsibilities of employees. And, it's kind of like a little flow chart, right? So next we go into that business continuity part. It talks about how are we going to continue to continue our service, essential functions before and during and after a disaster, and identifying your operations, your backup facilities, alternate suppliers, communication channels, and different strategies like backup for data and making sure like your business information is protected and accessible, that you can get to it when power's down. What are your backup strategies? Next is the insurance and financial piece, periodically reviewing your insurance coverages, because here for the Marshall Fire, for example, our residents were underinsured on average of $250,000. So as you can imagine, in a stressful environment of disaster recovery, materials, labor, all of that stuff skyrocketed. And being underinsured was really hard until we really got a lot of these rebates and programs in action. And a business would be the same way, making sure your insurance covers potential disaster related losses, property damage, business interruption, liabilities, and then ensuring that your financial reserves or lines of credit can cover those immediate expenses. And what does that slush fund look like, right? How do we sustain operations during these recovery periods? Supply chain resilience, alternative suppliers, backup sources for your materials and services, and communication protocols like, hey, if my financial system is down, how am I going to pay an invoice, right? Do we go to paper, stuff like that. Training and communication, I think, fire drills, safety protocols, roles and responsibilities, they're all little pieces to keep that framework tight and structured. So when these things happen, we know what we're all doing. We're not just going and putting out the event calendar that week. We have other priorities. Communication channels that your employees know how to get to you, or know what they're supposed to be doing, or know how to find information during a disaster. Keeping them informed about risks, evacuation procedures, and continuity type operations. Then testing and improvement, drills, simulations, collecting feedback from your employees and stakeholders after those simulations and drills, or even real events, doing an after action report with, hey, we saw a gap here. Hey, what did you think? Oh, this didn't go so well. How do we improve things? How do we identify those areas of improvement? And then making those adjustments to those plans to make sure the next time we're going to be a little bit better. I can guarantee you we will be better if and when this happens to us again, because we learned a lot. And then community engagement and collaboration, just knowing who your partners are and neighboring businesses, sharing resources, information, best practices, having that network in place is super important, and participating yourselves in community-wide exercises or initiatives. I mean, what's going on in your little neck of the woods? What's going on in your little neighborhood? Um, we just had a exercise that was a big flood event, right? It would be really good that if and when this happens, you have that network in place and you kind of know the cadence of what everybody else is doing. I don't know where my picture is for this one. It doesn't. Oh, there it is. So why does this engagement matters? You know, Disaster is about people. It disrupts lives, not just buildings and businesses. We always want to approach from a people first strategy, and everything else will fall into place because it's the people that really matter. And engaging community members early helps to ensure that these recovery efforts reflect their real needs and you're not just wasting time or energy. Um, hey, Caitlin, you want to mute yourself? Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry.
No problem. And then, when residents are part of this process, recovery is just faster, stronger, and more equitable. Local voices guide better decisions by revealing unseen priorities or barriers that we might not know about. Okay, effective community engagement. So, listening is number one. I know we say that a lot, but people know what they need. Um, Keep their voices as the center point. Be transparent. You can share what you know, what you don't know, and how things may change. Um, Sometimes that's really hard because we feel like we should be the experts in everything, but we're not. And if you're coming from a defensive place, it just doesn't work as well. You could say, I don't know, but I'll find out. Is this going wrong? Well, let me see how I can fix that. And so I think that can be hard, especially as a municipality, because we're the place that everyone comes to and we're supposed to know. And sometimes we don't, which is okay. Be culturally aware, meet people where they are, respecting diverse values and practices. Um, every community is nuanced and language is different. And so, making sure that you're paying attention to who your community is very important. And keeping things accessible. Make participation easy in your engagement. Think about your language, like we were talking about, transportation, time, digital access. Like, how do we keep this process as accessible as possible? So, effective recovery includes coordinated support from different places, right? Local government, tribal leaders, mutual aid, businesses, health providers, media, who can share critical information quickly. People are already plugged into these different networks. And if you have information that you would like to get ported into this recovery system, or you have resources or ideas on how you can help it, make sure you're connecting. To collaborate and make sure the word and the communications are getting out. This ready.gov is a great website to kind of take you step by step through planning and processes and teaming and all kinds of different areas that can kind of help you get that framework together that we were talking about in that other slide. So one thing I thought would be interesting to talk about is a case example. And this was from the 2018 Camp Fire, which I'm sure you're all familiar with if you're in California in Paradise. And I actually was able to go to DC and lobby with some of the campfire survivors and elected officials in DC. And it was really interesting, their recovery timeline and just all the struggles that they had. And, you know, when you start working with other people in that capacity that have seen this disaster and worked on recovery, I don't know, it's just a special bond that you all have because you speak the same language and you're concerned about the same things and you're really passionate about helping the community. So it was a great experience being with them. So I don't know if it's the most destructive wildfire now in California history, but this case study is about Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. You see our little resilience beer can there, and that this was their, you know, how they ended up helping recovery for this fire. They were located in Chico, and they had about 50 employees that lost homes. And so during response and coordination, they pivoted their operations to support the community and offered their facilities while the fire was still burning. They opened a tap room and served free meals to first responders and fire families. They gave out clothing to those in need, which, you know, people, everything burns, so you have nothing. And they even did like a free Thanksgiving dinner for 1,000 people. They established campfire relief fund and seeded it with an initial $100,000, and they launched this resilience Butte County Proud IPA fundraising initiative, which is this little beer can illustration here. They partnered with like 1,500 breweries nationwide. They made a recipe and then they reimbursed the participating breweries for the ingredients if they brewed this resilience beer and sold it at their establishments. And the agreement was that these breweries would then donate 100% of the sales back into wildfire recovery efforts for this fire. And the campaign raised over $8 million. And it demonstrates the power of business-led national collaboration, which is super cool. It makes me emotional, right? So internally, Sierra Nevada also provided housing and job support to displaced employees, and the donations funded things like temporary classrooms, bus passes, business recovery task force, and helping to fund a city planner and lots more. And when you think about city planner, right, all the permits and inspections of all this rebuilding and hazardous waste removal and debris removal and all that stuff. So it's a lot of work on municipal staff. For example, for the Marshall Fire, we had 42 employees, right? And I mean, we're just devastated and working, you know, 60, 80 hours a week. So the key takeaways about this is businesses can be anchors in disaster response, not just offer funding, but infrastructure, logistics, and leadership. Strategic partnerships and clear communication really amplify impacts, and preparedness and company culture plays a vital role in helping a rapid values-driven response. And on the left of the slide, this was our branding for our 3 municipalities that were impacted by the Marshall Fire, and having really coordinated communication efforts really cuts down confusion, even though you may have different policies in different places or different organizations within your organization may have different policies or definitions around work. That coordinated communication and display of unity is very important, and you guys should be looped into that as well during a recovery. Okay, tools. We're getting there, guys. We're getting there. So tools for stronger coordination. Situational, of course, situational awareness is super important. And this is an example of our dashboard. Like actually, if you could see my pointer, this is where the Brixmore property is. And so you could see that this neighborhood, all around this, I mean, there were other neighborhoods in town as well, but this neighborhood all around this Brixmore property was devastated. I mean, this complete neighborhood, all of these little parcels, each square represents a home. Every single one of these was destroyed, and many in this neighborhood as well. So you could see that this business facility is right there in that neighborhood. So using these dashboards or reports that track changing needs and being aware of them so you could see, oh, where are we at on our residents that are around our business? Like, how should we be coming back online as they're coming back online, or where are they at in their building process where we could support them? Joint briefings and resource hubs, kind of streamlining communication and reducing duplication of effort. Having that situational awareness helps people just not spin their wheels, right? Shared data and platforms, tracking aid delivery and potentially identifying gaps to help each other. And then predefined roles in memorandums of understandings or continuity of operation plans kind of gives us those predefined roles to avoid that chaos, and planning that before disaster hits is really important. So, okay. Recovery is not one size fits all. You have to focus on the needs of vulnerable groups. You think of aging adults, people with accessibility issues, uh, financially diverse. Like, what are we focusing on? Because those are the people that are going to have 2 to 3 times harder time having the energy and the time to recover or rebuild. What does that look like for them? And a big one that John is familiar with me talking about a lot is trauma-informed care approach. Not only does it avoid re-traumatization of the people that you're dealing with, but it also helps you identify internally when you're reaching burnout, right? We should all be trained in trauma-informed care if we're dealing with this, especially in a group like yours, because if you're going in and deploying to these sites, you need to know what language to use. You know how to talk to people in this grief space, and you know how to actually help them without igniting more trauma. And you also need to be aware of where you're at as far as secondary trauma and being able to, some people aren't cut out for it. You could be hugging hundreds of people in a day if you're volunteering at the Disaster Assistance Center that have lost everything and their pets, so it's really, really sad. So, this trauma informed care approach, I drill it in every lessons learned thing that I go to because I don't think people think about that, right? They want to jump in, they want to help, but you need to be able to be effective. And that's a really good way to be effective for that. And ensuring access long term to personal wellness and recovery services is really important. So we're almost to the final. This is it. This is it, guys. So what's next, right? Start now. Strengthen your local networks. Relationships take time. Like John, we've been talking about this for a while. He knows he can call me. We have trust established. Um, we're community partners and we're embedded now, right? And so we've built this relationship. Yes, it's post disaster, many places. Unfortunately, our department, my department, did not exist until the Marshall Fire. Um, but embed yourself in all of these different networks. Um, reflect on after action reviews and survivor feedback. Be adaptable. Plans are living documents. You can change them. Don't be afraid to pivot. Hey, that didn't work out that great. Let's try something else. Um, always include engagement. See what the people need and be responsive to that. And just keeping these networks strong is really important. And so that's kind of the spiel, guys.
Thank you, Allison. I really appreciate you going through this and meeting with the team. And I agree, fostering the relationships is critical here, and it's something that we could probably do better on as well. Oftentimes where disaster hits and you're kind of running around and trying to get the center rebuilt, but there's things we can do ahead of time that could assist in that. Well, does anyone have any questions or for Allison that they'd like to ask?
I'll just comment. That was so well presented, Allison. I mean, just you could tell that you were coming from both a compassionate but a knowledgeable place. And I hate to say it, you are just well suited to handle another disaster.
Bite your tongue,
Hopefully you
ma'am.
hopefully you don't have to.
Well, thank you for that feedback. I've done it a few times.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear
This one's
that.
a little different though. I haven't ever presented to a business group, so it definitely made me stretch a little bit differently than local government or construction. I'm a construction girl, really, to be honest. So
So Allison, you and I have not met. I am John's taker over for the Superior area. I'm knocking wood because I don't love you, don't ever want to have to meet you on site for anything. But it is true about being able to understand if this is something that you can do or not. To this day, people still talk about the fire and what they lost, and it comes out in a business context in the conversations, but immediately goes to in my house and the kids' school and all of this. And so there's a whole, you have to understand that when they talk about the loss of their business or the loss of sales or things that have impacted them, they immediately go into the personal side too. So I'm glad that you did bring that up because not everybody can or has the patience, and it's not a bad thing, has the patience to listen to the story over and over again, but it's still being played out on a daily basis, which here in Superior.
yeah, absolutely. And before you could get to what somebody needs, that story has to be told, right? And so you want to go, what do you really need? What do you really need? Come on, just tell me what you need. Because I'm a problem solver. That's kind of my love language, right? But you have to wait and be and just listen, and I think that's the best thing that for those people, depending on where they're at in their recovery, is that listening and telling their story helps to get rid of that trauma and to help their grief.
Allison, I couldn't agree more. I'm in the Florida region, and we dealt with obviously two hurricanes back to back last year. And we had two properties essentially flooded out. And the conversation with the team initially was, look, we're dealing with a human element here that should be first and foremost. Because there is some bad news that we're going to have to deliver. There's tenant responsibilities within the lease that we just can't take on as a landlord, right? So at the end of the day, the conversation is such that, hey, start it with the human element and then work into, and have those conversations in person, because having them over the phone or having them via email, there's no kind of, you're not sensitive to the tenant in that situation if you're, not having these conversations in person. So I couldn't agree more. And I think your presentation was phenomenal, but that was a highlight for me. And I think that's the way that we've kind of approached a lot of what we've been doing on the, in this disaster recovery, as an organization.
Where in Florida are you, Robbie?
I'm in the Orlando region,
Okay.
but
Yeah, I grew up in
might
Homestead. So
gotcha. Okay.
yeah, my whole town was destroyed by Hurricane Andrew. So years ago. So yeah, I think that, you know, people have lost their landmarks, they've lost their homes, they've got fear of here, the open space where the wildfire came through. And why do you think people come to Colorado, right? There's mountains, there's lakes, there's skiing, there's hiking, there's camping. Everybody comes here to enjoy these open spaces. And now there's this fear um, from the wildfire. And so a major part of their daily life and enjoyment and has been replaced by fear. And so reconnecting, like crazy enough, like I do construction, right? But I got certification in nature and forest therapy. So we're taking fire families back out to the land to regain this resilience and this daily enjoyment of reconnecting to what they love that they have all this fear around. So you just never know what you're going to do in this space.
That's amazing. I love the way that you touched in your one graph, about the heroic stage, and then as things start to wind down and it's realizing, okay, where do we go from here? Was wondering if you had any tips, or thoughts that you could share with our group, as to how you kind of transition from that response to the recovery stage, because and how you kind of help keep the momentum, going for those stakeholders, in our case, our tenants, during the recovery process.
Gosh, that's a good question. I think in response, you're like, for me, I was a project manager. I wasn't in this role. And what were we doing? We were looking for infrastructure. We were zooming in on satellites and trying to turn off and on electricity to make sure our water, or switching water out to get water to these areas to try to firefight, right? And then as soon as the fires were out, it snowed the next day, which we all cried, right? Because if it would have snowed the day before, there would have been, this wouldn't have happened. So that was crazy. And then, so it happened on a Thursday. Friday, it snowed. And then Sunday, we were like, okay, we've got to take care of these people. We've got to stand up at the disaster assistance center. We got to turn off utilities. We got to, do all this stuff to kind of, you know, get people moving through this process to help them recover, just the beginning. And I think most municipalities have the lens that people should be able to hopefully self-sustain for 72 hours, right? And then, because you're responding, you've got hundreds of fire engines coming from everywhere all over the state of Colorado, and you've got lots of logistics, and your National Guard is coming. I mean, it's a big thing. So once you start pivoting into the recovery space, I think, making sure that people get their breaks and retreats, and you're documenting your staff time for like FEMA reimbursement. And I think to pivot into more long-term recovery, once people feel a little more settled, like that communications has been going on rapid fire, people want to get in with their insurance assessors in the neighborhoods, like there's all this stuff going on. And I think as you start moving from immediate needs, response, immediate needs, and then you start moving towards, okay, process needs, right? Like, where can we streamline processes that may have been a little more clunky, like permitting processes to rebuild? So I think the good thing is the work is not boring. You don't get bored.
Mhm.
And I think, everybody has an expertise that can be like integrated. And so I think switching out staff and making sure people are getting breaks is good, right? Because then you're able to infuse these different projects with some new ideas. I mean, I would rather have 5 of us working on a problem so I could hear all these different viewpoints and then pick and choose what the best item is. So I think infusing and taking out people can be good, to help you sustain that. And being just mindful of those processes, like what do we really, really need right now? And let's get rid of the rest. So a continuity of operations plan, beautiful thing. You want to get your services back online as quick as you can, and you need to know the prioritization. So if you work on this, it's called a COOP plan, continuity of operations plan. It kind of outlines all the tasks that you do, and then it prioritizes them by 24 hours a week and a month. some people do a little a fourth tier, but I like the three. And then it gives your team a focus, right? Because like I was saying, oh, I'm going to put out the monthly calendar. No, you're not. That doesn't have to be done for 30 days. You can work on restoring water today, right? And so having, I think, a plan like that in place, just so where you feel success, right? You're checking off your tier one things in 24 hours, your tier two for a week, and you're on track, right? And I think having that is really helpful.
Thank you. That's great advice. Definitely. I think, the sense of accomplishing things and checking off on the list really goes a long way. Hmm.
Here's my list for today. No, it's this week. I'm
Yeah.
a I'm a checker offer. I mean, I have tons of tech platforms, but these checklists are legal documents, so you could always have a backup.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I just wanted to comment on, you touched on, the traumatic part of it, and it's talking with those people who are affected, in the traumatic experience. You know, I'd love to know and learn more about better ways to handle the various situations that we encounter. For anything from hurricanes, tornadoes, to fires, to unfortunately, we recently had a plane crash here in Philadelphia at one of our shopping centers. So, dealing with that and the multiple agencies, that traumatic experience for the people, the business owners, but, and also the community, the residents, was something different. But I wanted to know if you had any resources that might be helpful for us to sort of go to and just learn different ways to be able to communicate with those people affected.
Yeah, I actually partnered with a group. I got it funded through a grant to do our trauma-informed care training, and I have a great group. I think it's called Hummingly. I could look it up really fast. I think that's who I used. And it's interesting because they kind of got going by the was it New Zealand that had those huge earthquakes?
Okay.
I think it's called Hummingly. But they were great. And we did it for our staff, our volunteer organizations in disaster that popped up that were kind of resident led. And we did it for our elected officials. So we did it for quite a few groups that were working. Yeah, Hummingly. And her name is Jolie Willis. She is
Great.
great. You could tell her that I referred you.
Thank you. Yeah. And, I would also just say, you also mentioned the secondary trauma, how are you doing in all of this? So that's very much important. And I think, trying to rotate volunteers, because obviously we're a volunteer group, we step in and try to help each other out as needed. So making sure that people, and this, there's no pun intended here, get burnt out, because it's a real thing. So, trying to rotate shifts and things like that and make sure everybody is okay is really important too.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I had some great girlfriends that like after about a month, they were like, "We're taking you to the hot springs. You are only allowed to work 3 hours a day. That's it." And we went up on a Friday morning and came back on a Sunday. And I was like, whoa, guys, whoa, thank you. That was amazing because, I think I had anywhere from 2 to 6,000 emails a day. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
just
a lot.
email,
Yeah,
not alone phone calls. I was like,
right. Great. Well, thank you.
what else?
That's it. Really, Allison, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Team, always great seeing you. And I'll be posting her presentation on our channel as well. And no, again, I look forward to meeting with you all again. And again, thank you so much, Allison. Hope to talk to you soon. I'll let you know when I'm in Colorado next.
You betcha. And if you guys want to reach out, my email's in the slides. Feel free to reach out especially if you have a thing happen. Unfortunately, it might happen. So, I'm a part of your network now.
Great. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.